Hello and welcome to the Barrcast. I'm your host, Nick Barr, coming to you on a Tuesday afternoon. We're powering through the 9, starting with the social 9, whose keyword is participación or pertenencia, participation and belonging. Belonging is a really great keyword here because it invites in both the sense of membership and participation and a sense of place that a social 9 longs for in belonging. You can hearing the longing in belonging. So they long to belong. And then there's also the feeling of like being an object or I belong to this group. There's a way of giving up one's individuality in belonging. So it's both, and we'll get right into it. Naranjo says, the social 9 is a good-natured person. What drives a good-natured person? What lies behind these cheerful, light-hearted individuals? According to this framework, the passion of the social 9 is participation. They need to feel like an integral part of something. But anyone with an intense need to participate, to become part of something, is someone who doesn't feel part of anything. That's the essence of the keyword. They feel this need to participate, and that need is insatiable, so they'll never feel full belonging. For the social 9, the experience of not fitting in, of feeling different, of believing they lack what it takes to be a part of a group or community, leads them to overcompensate by showing a kind of generosity, being highly attentive to others in the group. They are particularly skilled at meeting others' needs and often become effective leaders. The best type of leader, in the sense of being a good person, generous and self-sacrificing when it comes to any responsibility others might assign to them. Their passion is doing what's necessary to pay the toll to be admitted into the group, but this requires a great deal of effort. Social 9s are the workaholics of the Enneagram. They feel they need to give a lot, but at the same time, they need to be pleasant and agreeable. Their internal model is don't show pain, don't burden others. Their expression is happier than sad, but this doesn't mean real participation. Rather, it's a kind of partial participation, a substitute. So if you're looking at the circle of the Enneagram, we're at the top with the social 9. And then if we draw a line a vertical line splitting the Enneagram, and to the bottom, we would find the gap between the 4 and the 5. And how would we define this y-axis? One way of defining it is relation to separation. So listen to how much like a 4/5 the 9 sounds here. This experience of not fitting in, of feeling different, of believing they lack what it takes to belong or to be a part, to connect. So the 9, just like the 4/5, feels the pain of separation, but takes a totally opposite strategy when it comes to what to do with that. For the 4, the felt sense of separation becomes an addiction. So their passion is envy, i.e., noticing how much more separated or disconnected they feel from others compared to others. The 5 takes a slightly different approach and essentially sort of gives in to that sense of separation and experiences a kind of deadening in which there's an emptiness that they recognize in a sort of their home base. So both the 4 and 5, while having different levels of anguish around it, they lean toward the pole of feeling the separation, of accepting the separation, of dwelling in separation. The 9 works really hard to not feel separated. So that's their workaholic quality. They really want to be part of the group. And they continually pay that toll, as Naranjo describes, to be a part of the group. Because the sense of separation is never healed. So they always need to do something more to prove that they belong, to sort of gain the goodwill and not get ejected by the group, which I think, as we'll see, for the most part, is a concern that the 9 has made up, that the group doesn't want them. And I love that Naranjo points out here that, yeah, nines make great leaders, the kind of best kind of leader. It does come from this, like, wanting not to get ejected from the group, but in a position of power, that ends up being quite a wonderful thing. Good person, generous, self-sacrificing when it comes to responsibility. So let's hear from Miriam Ortiz de Zarate, Transformation in the Social Nine. How did the beginning of the search occur? What was the moment of greatest suffering? I don't think there were periods of great suffering in my life, just as there were never periods of great joy. A striking characteristic of my life is that it went on for years without major ups or downs, without disturbances. 0 degrees, neither hot nor cold, flat line. Sometimes I would look at others enjoying and celebrating moments of happiness, but I didn't feel like them. They seemed excessive to me. I didn't think I had any problem. Everything in my life was fine, under control. I was blind and insensitive, the perfect formula for not seeing, not feeling, not noticing. This evokes that indolence that we talked about in the introduction to the Nine. My search began in a somewhat accidental way, and I put it in italics because I don't believe in accidents. At the end of 2003, at the age of 44, I left my job as an executive in a multinational company. It wasn't a planned change, but rather a decision I made impulsively, as I had with some of the most important decisions in my life. Leaving work allowed me to slow down, to think more carefully about how I wanted to shape my life, and to decide that I wanted more balance between my professional and personal life. In the following months, I decided to take a sabbatical year to train as a coach, so I started 2004 with this idea. First semester, I took a coaching course, Enneatypes, the SAT training, started meditation, yoga, and therapy. When I think about that period, what got me moving, it was a mix of luck and intuition, as if some part of myself, which I was very unaware of, had decided that it was time to make changes. She started therapy for her daughter's sake. How blind I had been for years, too focused on the work world and positions of great responsibility, believing I had everything under control when in fact it was quite the opposite. My daughters had problems. My relationship was completely deteriorated. This was the situation I found around me when I opened my eyes and began to look. With other Social Nine colleagues, the active beginning of their search is marked by a painful event, and this pain in many cases is triggered by a separation. Separation from parents and children, separation from partners, separation might be due to death or the end of a relationship. But in all cases, the most significant person to the Social Nine stops being present in their life, triggering a conscious cataclysm, like the one described by a young Social Nine woman regarding her partner. Quote, "When he died, I fell into a deep void. I realized I had been living his life and I had died with him." End quote. Or it can manifest in the onset of symptoms, like a woman who describes how, after her father's death, she began to suffer anxiety attacks that developed into paralyzing agoraphobia. In most cases, the person who caused the pain was the one who gave the Social Nine a sense of identity and reality, as they often doubt their own existence. In the before and after descriptions of their own process, Nines often use phrases, which I quote directly, such as, quote, "I didn't feel like I existed, I didn't exist, I had a life full of things, but without me." So the Nine is sort of in this narrative, shaken awake through real separation that can't be avoided. And in that separation, they realize how little of their own life they had been living, that their own non-existence becomes spotlighted when this anchor relationship is removed, and so is their almost entire identity. How do I see myself now? What are the greatest differences I perceive? So she writes about being able to see, to feel, to notice things. I'm very clearly experienced what Claudio calls the elephant skin, so typical of Nines. This tough exterior. And this is something you'll hear a lot about the Nine, where the Nine is so sort of exposed to experience, to the world around them. And that's so draining for them because, remember, they're always trying to harmonize. They're always trying to maintain homeostasis. They're trying to keep the status quo, that if everything requires a response, that's tremendously exhausting for them. And so they develop this sort of thick exterior, this resistance to change that helps keep the status quo, basically staying asleep, staying resistant to new input. And when we were dealing with the 8, we talked about the lion who has this great conservation of energy. The lioness, she eats when she's hungry. So that's sort of that 8 animal energy. And in the 9, we're moving that all the way to the thick elephant hide. So that conservation of energy is in the extreme with the 9 in general. Let's see how she continues. So she goes on, working with sensitivity, the ability to perceive sensations was my entryway to approach emotions. At first, every time I stopped to look and ask myself about my emotions, sadness invariably came up. When it happened, it felt like meeting an old acquaintance who had accompanied me throughout my entire life. However, behind the pain and sadness was anger and fear, which appeared much later. I'd barely experienced intense emotions before. Being able to feel and evoke emotions of love, gratitude, joy, fulfillment, and also feeling sadness, fear, or anger are all very new to me. So we talked in the past about the 7 who has trouble feeling the negative end of the spectrum, accessing things like fear, anger, guilt, or even just negativity, grief. And so they sort of seek out pleasure after pleasure to sort of keep facing the we need more positive to sort of hide from the negative, to put it in sort of a blunt way. But for the 9, there's an overall numbing. There's an overall just sort of non-experiencing that's characterized by the elephant skin. So it's not just a resistance to action, it's a resistance to feeling. It's a resistance to the positive and negative feeling. It's very difficult for me to face conflict situations, hard for me to even see them. Now I clearly perceive aggression. Setting boundaries, defending myself, handling difficult conversations. These are things I didn't know how to do before and now do much better. She says, I used to be much more controlling. Things had to be a certain way. That's the 1. That's the 1 wing there. At work with my coworkers, at home with my daughters and husband, I would organize, give orders. Everything had to be done the way I said. I didn't trust others. I had to intervene, supervise everything. Still have a lot to learn here, but I'm gradually letting go, controlling less and trusting more, accepting that there are other ways of doing things, that my way is not the way. That my eldest daughter's lifestyle, for example, isn't better or worse than mine. Before, I was constantly intervening in her life, in her choices, in her ways of doing things. Then I stopped intervening, still thinking, however, that she was making mistakes, that she wasn't doing things right. Now I accept that she has her own criteria and respect her decisions, almost always. That all sounds very 1-ish. Were I to guess, this woman, what was her name? Anna? Miriam Ortiz de Zarate. If I had to guess, the way she intervened probably was more 9-ish passive aggressive rather than aggressive, for example. But she doesn't go into detail there. So that's a 1 energy, but you might guess executed with a 9's tact or evasiveness. She describes more about being a sandwich child, the middle of 5, never having feeling like that she belonged. But, she says, I'm constantly plagued by the thought that I don't belong, that I haven't earned the right to be there, that I don't sing as well as others. It's completely unrealistic, a fantasy. I can see it and laugh about it, but it's a recurring thought, especially if I'm feeling sensitive. This seems to be the path for the 9, not actually landing in their sense of belonging, but to learn to note this feeling of not belonging as just another, like a thing that comes up, and not get hooked so much by the lack of belonging. Um, she says, what's helped me to grow? The tension inherent in these impossible lives, dominated by self-forgetfulness, generates the energy needed for social nines to embark on their search. Sometimes this happens almost magically, by chance, as an emergency measure, or as a matter of survival. So sort of just connecting with the impossibility of her survival strategy. Group work has been beneficial, meditation, yoga, body work, seeking mentors, fellow travelers, certain readings, having a journal, writing and working with dreams. This is interesting. So, through pain arise doubts and questions. A social nine might ask, what if all my acceptance is just the result of my indolence? Taboo topics or simply ignored ones also arise. What if it's all a mask and my love isn't as unconditional as I thought? What if the true source of my unconditionality is fear of abandonment, fear of conflict, fear of separation, fear of losing the apparent and feigned peace and harmony? Claudio has said that the essence of the spiritual path is transforming our attitude towards suffering. This can be observed in all cases. Undesired emotions like fear, anger, sadness are felt and accepted. Here are some statements. Quote, before I rarely experience intense emotion, being able to feel and evoke emotions of love, gratitude, joy, fulfillment, also to feel sadness, fear, or anger are very new experiences. I've learned to feel and endure pain. I feel pain much more strongly, but also pleasure. I live more. My awareness of what I do occupies a significant part of my thoughts. I allow things that hurt to hurt. I get less angry and I enjoy more. So then if we go back to the question, which she didn't fully answer, these doubts that a social nine might have. What if this isn't real love? What if my acceptance is just laziness? What if fear is behind all this? I think what she's saying is somewhat deep. It's to permit those fears to exist without either getting hooked on them as some sort of authority. Because I feel these fears, because I feel these doubts, they must be saying something ultimately true about me. And also without burying them. Oh, no, I'm sure this is love. It's like an openness and a capacity to feel these very troubling feelings and include them in the greater whole. And I guess the answer is just you don't know what the answer is. So in some cases, the doubts may be justified and there may be real signal there. In other cases, it might just be sort of an unhelpful, nagging fear. You say, there's that fear. Okay, hello, old friend. But in all cases, the nine's work is to endure. And when we think about the four, again, at the bottom, the four lives in that endurance. They really have quite a lot of capacity for all of these difficult emotions. And sometimes they actually sort of need to start to see the sunny side, whereas the nine needs to actually start to endure some of these emotions. And I think they'll find that they can, because the nine, like we've seen, is a workhorse in their own way. And it does seem like it's possible for the nine to quite beautifully develop capacity for all these profound feelings without throwing away their easygoing, good-natured spirit. What have I left behind and what is emerging now? I'm not sure I've definitively left anything behind. That's a beautiful example. I think, so many types would say, I've left behind this, I've left behind that. The nine is like, I'm not sure if I've left anything behind. For me, she says the onion and layers metaphor is very clear. Now I can handle many difficult conversations, but some still catch me off guard. I feel more centered and less forgetful, but I still experience forgetfulness and distraction. I feel connected, but I still disconnect at times. I control less, but I still control. Nevertheless, peeling back the layers of the onion has revealed new things. Sometimes for me, for example, something new for me has been the experience of fear. Before, when I felt fear, I disguised it, got angry, controlled, or blamed others. Now I recognize it as fear and feel it in the pit of my stomach, a completely new emotion for me. Another new development is a need for transcendence, a spiritual dimension, which I still don't know how to handle or through which channels to express it. So she says, as we close here, for me, the two phases to work on the character, the first phase is awareness, and the second is change or action. Helps to ask myself what I need, what do I want, how do I feel, take time for myself, take care for myself, be alone. And she says, in the work of self-awareness, we nines need to be very attentive and mindful so as not to lose focus, not to forget ourselves. We must establish mechanisms to avoid dulling our awareness and to stay awake and conscious. Refine the elephant skin by working with sensory experiences. So even though the 9 is in the doing triad and it is sort of then taking in information in through the body, through what needs to be done, that thick skin of theirs numbs or deadens what needs to be done. And that's why the 9 is conflicted in the doing triad. They're conflicted doers, or they don't do. They know what needs to be done and then they don't do it. Or they blind themselves to it or fall asleep to what needs to be done. And so everything she's saying here is trying to wake up that quality, wake up that awareness. My therapist has helped me a lot by repeatedly asking me the hardest questions. How are you? My tendency was to answer from my head. How am I supposed to be? Things are going well, so I'm supposed to be fine. Shifting her attention to her body, listening to what's coming from the gut, daring to open the Pandora's box containing my instinctual and emotional self, looking inside. That is the answer. For a social 9, she closes, confrontation is very helpful, being lovingly but firmly shaken because we slip away a lot, i.e. the 9 needs to be confronted. And that's it. So that's the social 9. Whose keyword, again, this idea of participation, or I think more beautifully belonging, which speaks to that pain of separation that the 9 feels and then doesn't let themselves feel by working really hard to belong, which is, again, just quite a wonderful pro-social attitude that earns them many friends, makes them great leaders, but self-forgetting is at the same time obviously doomed, and there are many ways that it falls apart. But in the cases that she presents here, I think quite interestingly, self-forgetting falls apart when the person or the relationship to which you're anchored disappears. Then you're really face to face with non-existence. So it's a strategy that works until it doesn't for the 9. And when they're confronted with, well, what do you want? What are you going to do? Is this the person you should be with? Those kinds of questions, they're faced with, they confront the void. And that can be scary. So even though the 9 is in the anger triad, and Miriam mentions anger quite a bit, fear is also, I think, quite present for the 9, and accessing fear and anger and allowing them to sit in the body and to listen to them and not just take them as things that need to be avoided is a powerful part of the journey. So that's the social 9, and we'll continue next time with the sexual 9, whose keyword is, I think it's symbiosis. Let me check. Yes, so that'll be a fun one. See you there.